Hello, everybody. Bob Oxley here, and it's time for tips, topics, issues, and positions. And today our topic is going to be on U.S. immigration policy again. It's in the news on a daily basis. And of course, if I'm talking immigration, I'm going to ask Mr. Tyler Todd, for immigration attorney, to come back, and he has agreed to do so. And I really appreciate this because of you can imagine being an immigration attorney in these times and all the clients. And we're going to talk about a number of things that are ongoing because our listeners have called in and they really want to hear from the horse's mouth, like what's really going on and how to interpret things that are going on. And that's why I invited Tyler Todd back, and welcome back, Tyler.
Thank you for having me back.
And I really do appreciate it because I know how busy you are. It's scary times.
It's scary times, and it's an important thing to talk about. I mean, it's especially this weekend. I'm glad to be here and glad we can talk about it.
And we're going to talk about that. First of all, I'd really like to just start talking about, because what's happened in the last couple of weeks is Clinton, Texas, the detention center there. Some of the Congress people went down there, and they were shocked at the deplorable situation that they have there. And then on top of that, the Attorney General's report came out to Congress saying, indeed, use the same term, deplorable conditions. We have one side, the Democratic Party, saying that this is deplorable. We've got to do something about it. What's wrong with the system? The system's broke. This is just scary. It's not humane. On the other side, from the Republican standpoint, they are agreeing to that in the last 48 hours that it is deplorable, but they're doing the best they possibly can. So I would really like to throw that out at you. When we're talking about these detention centers, are we doing everything legal? Can we take children away and isolate them and not have toilet facilities or enough water or sleeping conditions? I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, those are all great questions, and kind of like what we talked about prior to coming on the air. I think the numbers are staggering, right? I mean, we're seeing a dramatic increase in immigration, both legal and illegal, and so to a certain degree, on one hand, you can certainly recognize some of the concerns that the Republican Party would like us to believe that, yeah, it's unprecedented. We're not ready for this type of immigration movement or number of people that are coming across our borders, and how do we humanely treat them? I can appreciate that response, but then on the other side, we can also say, and I think that's what the Democratic Party is saying, well, we're America. We're the United States. We have the resources. We have the ability to treat individuals humanely, notwithstanding the legal process that needs to be followed.
Right.
And I think that's the issue, right? Is that there's such a push by the Republican Party, and probably most importantly our president, to deter immigration and deter these individuals from coming across our borders, that I'm not there. So I can't say I don't have firsthand knowledge of what's happening. You see the videos, you see the photos, you see the drawings of these little children, of what appears to be drawings of cages, and they're referring to them, the detention centers, as dog kennels. And so when you get that feedback, you have to believe that a lot of what's being reported is accurate. And with that, I think that's sad. And I think what's happening is that you're having the Republican Party, maybe Trump's people, saying it's not as bad as it appears, but it is. And I think they're saying the right things on the, in the media, to make it sound not as bad as it is, but they know.
Yes.
They know what they're doing, right? I would believe that they know what they're doing. I would believe that they're doing it for the very reason of what they're saying, to deter people from coming. So when they're acknowledging finally that it's deplorable and it is as bad as people are suggesting, I believe it is. But I also believe they don't really care. And that's their method of saying, don't come because you're going to be put into deplorable conditions. And that's not right. We as a country founded on immigrants and open borders and freedoms and liberties and that we're all created equal, that's not right. So how do we treat these people? How do we deal with the increased numbers? And that's a challenge. So I'm not trying to be naive to that challenge. I know there's a lot of good men and women that are probably dealing with that challenge that would like to see better conditions, but if the resources aren't there and the federal government is not putting the resources there, how do you deal with it?
Yeah. And I just, like I say, when the Justice Department report came out this last week, they just parroted exactly what was being said from observations by congressional representatives at these facilities. And the New York Times actually had a sketch on their front page last Sunday that showed how the different ages of the children and how they were being told they couldn't talk and they had to be quiet and this and that. And it's a sad situation. And overcrowding is one major, lack of toilets in some of the rooms, overcrowding in some of the rooms. These kids, what a trauma they're going through.
Well, and I can tell you, practicing immigration, even here in southern Utah, we see a lot of families coming over from Central America and Mexico, and most recently, we've dealt with some families and have helped some families. One, I'll give you two different examples. One family from El Salvador, to where the conditions there are so bad and dire to the degree that they are shipping their children alone. Wow. And we're talking 11, 12, 13-year-old children, and they're sending them over alone. And the journey is taking 2, 3, 4 weeks to get to the U.S. And then they're being detained at the border. And then they are contacting their family members here in the United States to come get them. In fact, another example, I just had a call this morning from a client whose family members have been detained in Texas and asked if he could travel to Texas to go get them because he was worried about traveling intrastate. And so he was worried about going from one state to the other, particularly Texas, to go get his family because they're being detained at the border at the moment.
And what was your response to that?
It's safe. I mean, it's safe to go get them and go get them. Absolutely. So it's a constant challenge. And so that the one family from El Salvador, hearing it was a 13-year-old girl, hearing her story it's phenomenal. And what she went through to get to this country alone as a 13-year-old girl in trucks, and she had to walk for long periods of time, then from El Salvador. So we're talking she had to go all through Central America, up through Mexico, and a lot of it was on foot, and a lot of it was in a vehicle. And that journey, and then they got to the border, and then they sent her back because it wasn't the right time. I mean, this debate brings up a lot of issues regarding, is that the right thing to do? Is that a smart thing to do by her mom and dad in El Salvador? I don't know.
How desperate was it?
Desperate was it, right? I mean, if there's an issue of being put into sex trafficking and gangs threatening the family that they're going to kidnap their daughter and put her into prostitution, what do you do? Yeah. So it's hard to say because we here aren't there, so we don't know how bad the conditions are. We read about them, we hear the stories, we see the things that are happening. Every now and then I've had the chance to travel. You go down, you see it too. There's also parts of El Salvador and Central America and Costa Rica and Honduras and Guatemala that are lovely to visit.
Yes.
And so you wonder how bad it is, but I guess that's not the focus. The focus is we have an issue now, and how are we dealing with it? And so in regard to this detention center issue that we're talking about, I have another family I just met with a couple of days ago.
Okay.
from Honduras, and I don't know if they were part of the caravan or not, um, but they claimed asylum at the border.
Okay.
Okay, and so they were detained there at the border, and this family told me for the first 2 nights while detained there at the border, the husband and wife were separated. So the two minor children, we're talking a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, stayed with the mother,
Okay.
and they slept on the concrete floor for 2 nights.
On concrete, nothing.
Nothing.
Just concrete.
They told me they were given a plastic sheet to put on the floor, so that it was at least clean. I guess that was the purpose of the plastic sheet. But on concrete floor for 2 nights with the children. They didn't see their father, husband for those 2 nights. And then they were all reunited the 3rd night at another detention center where they at least had either foam mattresses or cots. I couldn't quite tell how they were explaining that, but it was better than a concrete floor at least.
It's amazing.
But that's what that's, that's
the numbers are overriding the system, number one. And you hear from people that work for ICE saying these facilities were built for older males trying to get into our country, not for families, not for small children, and the major problem and an overload.
It's an overload. In fact, I think they're now converting old Walmarts to detention centers.
Yes,
and
they just started doing that.
Right. So now they're turning supermarket stores into detention centers, which of course were not built for that, and don't have the plumbing and facilities for that. And so it's a mess. And I think what you said earlier, it's a crisis. I mean, it's an absolute crisis that's been created by implementing this and instilling this fear in the people, and whether that's created by our government, by governments afar, from gang violence there in those particular countries, it's hard to say. But the most important thing right now we have to ask ourselves is how are we dealing with it, and how is our government dealing with it, and what we have to ask our president is how are you dealing with this in a humane way. Which brings us to the question of these raids this weekend, and is that humane? Is that the right way of going about it? Everyone knows as we go into 2020 with our elections coming up that immigration is a very, very, very huge issue, and I guess regardless of how you feel about it, you need to make your congressman or woman know how you feel, and it needs to be addressed.
Exactly. I'm going to talk about that upcoming raid, as you say. They're going to make some. We'll talk a little bit more detail later on in the show. But as far as the children's separation, there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's some concepts that, and you just said that one of your clients had the 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, that they were allowed to stay with the mother.
Correct.
Okay. There was a misunderstanding that all children were just separated and shipped off to remote locations, like they're coming across to Texas, or they're shipped off to New York or whatever. What's fact and what's fiction on this? Is that what I mean? My understanding, and I'm not the attorney, you are, but my understanding was that there's a separation time limit of 72 hours.
That's correct. So what's happening is when these individuals are coming across the border, they're either being processed and returned immediately, meaning they're just being turned around.
Okay.
Or if the individual is claiming asylum and it's probably not new, but what these transporters or coyotes are telling their cargo, if you will,
yeah.
right? Their clients, if you want, if they're so dignified to call them their clients, right? They're telling these people to get to the border and claim asylum. Okay.
Yeah.
And that I'm scared and I'm seeking relief. I'm seeking asylum. So they're being instructed to do that. So by doing that, then they are then by law, by U.S. law, allowed the process of presenting an asylum case to an immigration judge. Okay. So what that does is, and then the question then begs, well, how soon do they get to be heard? And oftentimes what's happening is they're being detained, they're being processed, and then they're being released, because that hearing won't happen for several months.
So what do they do? You say they're released to where?
In public, I mean, they're just
walking out
of jail, yeah, out of the detention centers. So then they will go and either stay within that community where the detention centers are, but more than likely, and what's generally happening is those individuals are then connecting with family members wherever they may be.
And that usually gets you, when you declare asylum, that usually if you have somebody here already, a family already here already, that's probably going to, you're more apt to get privileged to go be with them. Is that right? In other words, there's no...
Well, you're not going to be given any sort of, you're not going to be granted any sort of asylum or relief.
Okay.
But you're going to be released at least to leave the detention center, to go wait your hearing. And then you have to check in with your local immigration officers wherever you may be.
Okay.
And then say, hey, I promise to appear at my first master hearing, or I promise to appear at this next hearing. But what's happening is they'll go to their hearing, and the immigration judges will say, well, you probably need an attorney. And then they'll give them more time to go find an attorney. So this particular family from Honduras entered in April.
Wow.
And so they've already had a first appearance in June.
And that's where you come in.
And then their next appearance is in August.
All right.
And then you can then pursue, accumulating the proper asylum documents. Okay. So it just depends on where these family members are. And I think that's part of the issue, is why we're having all these different family members appearing in multiple cities across the country saying, hey, I'm in New York, or I'm in Chicago, I'm here, and this is what's happening to our families here. And then having checked in to our local immigration officer, we're being detained because we haven't checked in appropriately or whatever it may be. So I think that's what's happening, because if the individuals are coming in, and this is another issue, if they're coming in from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, it makes it significantly more difficult for our government to send them back home. If they're coming in from Mexico, which is neighboring our border, right?
Yes.
They just turn them around. But when they're coming from the Central American countries, to get them back to those countries, that's obviously more of a process. You either have to put them on a bus or an airplane, and that takes time.
Yeah.
So it's just a complicated process, because we do have the procedure in place to enable these people to then make a legitimate claim for asylum. Now, whether that's going to be granted or not is a wholly different story.
Okay.
Because to get asylum relief is very, very difficult.
Okay. Along with the process, we just touched on previously today, the children separation situation. When this first started a year ago or so, they were separated, and the children were sent out to these remote states from the detention center. What has the system improved? Have they made changes where the children can be reunited with their parents or parent?
Well, I think with the public pressure and the pressure from our Congress, I think that's improved.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's improved. They have a long way to go, but now, like you've seen in the news, it's only for and pursuant to the zero tolerance policy. The separation is only supposed to take place when their parents are appearing in court. But as we're hearing stories and reading things and seeing things on the news and videos, that's not happening. I mean, the separation is continuing longer than going to appear in court and coming back, and why that's happening, I don't know. Okay. I would imagine it's happening because it's just another deterrent to say, hey, yeah, we know what the law says and we know what we're supposed to do, but this is what's really happening. Don't come across, because there's a chance it's going to happen to you too.
Got it. So it's a little bit of a threat.
That's the way I'm seeing it
Right.
and taking it. And I,
And there's a misnomer on their side by the coyotes saying all you have to do is get to the U.S. border and declare, hey, it's been really bad where I came from, and request asylum, and you're going to get it. Like, that's how they think. That's what they've been told. You know, the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world. And
it's good business, right? I mean,
and they're making money. I mean, families are putting together their last savings.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's another really, really sad, tragic part of this process is they are really putting together every last dime of all of their savings to provide a better life for their children. So on one hand, you get it. And on the other, is it really that bad? But they are doing everything they can to get to the U.S. border to claim relief. And then it's another, really another just can of worms that they're opening, because they're being detained. They're being put into a legal process they don't understand. That's wholly unfair at the moment in the way it's set up. And so the ability to actually get relief that they're seeking is borderline impossible, particularly depending on where they're doing it from. So, we're here in Utah talking about this, and our federal courts in Utah, and our another close court is Las Vegas.
Yes.
To get relief out of Salt Lake or Las Vegas immigration court is borderline impossible.
Wow.
And so, because the standards in our judges they're so high that, I'll give an example.
Yes, please.
Okay. Brother and sister. And I want to say the country was El Salvador. It might be Costa Rica, but it's Central America. Same set of facts. Okay. Both seeking asylum. Sister has sought asylum because she lives and she's in the court in San Francisco. And asylum's granted to sister from the court in San Francisco. Same set of facts with brother in Las Vegas, and he's denied.
Wow.
So does the court have a difference, and the jurisdiction where you're seeking those benefits have a difference? Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Unfortunately, but that's
that's right. Even within the system, and then we were talking about them spending every last dime, every last penny to get maybe a member of their family, with the 13-year-old example that you gave, and then when they're told, okay, now you have to find an attorney, where do they get the money for that? How does that all work? And you're in the middle of it.
And that's a great question.
If they've expended virtually every dime just for the sake of their children, our children, child, it's amazing.
Therein lies the empathy that we have to have for these people, because those are real life issues, and you don't want to give them false hope
Yeah. Unfortunately, we got to take a break. Okay, don't go away, everybody. We're going to come back. We're just going to take a short break, some important messages that KDXI 100.3 wants to give to you, but don't go away. Tyler, Todd, and I will be back right after these messages, and get ready, because we're going to get even more in depth, because we want to find out what's going to be going on in the future here, because there's some things that are going to be happening, and we want to talk about that. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Hello, everybody. Bob Oxley, and our special guest here is our immigration attorney, Tyler Todd. We're back to continue on with our discussion of immigration policy. We've taken a look and discussed some of the facilities and of the detention centers and the deplorable situation there. Tyler's been so gracious as to give some actual real-life examples of some of his clients in the last month that he's encountered with them and the procedure itself. We also discussed about the separation of the children, how that's improved somewhat, not in all cases, but somewhat. So that was as a result of congressional and public concern. So that's some good news. But what I really want to get into is what's going to be happening. We've all read about it. The Immigration and Custom Enforcement offices, with the backing of 10 federal judges, have opened the doors and said that this Sunday, which would be July the 14th, they're going to have a major roundup in 10 major cities throughout the country, as well as some other smaller cities, but they've designated some of those cities. And my understanding is that, believe it or not, we have 37 million illegal immigrants in those 10 major metropolitan cities. Now, if they're going to do a roundup, what's the ramifications? Can we even fathom that? What's going to happen, and the anxiety that's going on, and what about the Dreamers, and what about DACA, and what? It's just, it's something that's going to happen. So you're living with this on a day-to-day basis. So Tyler, would you just let us know what you know, and I'll bring in some information that I've picked up also, and let's have an open discussion.
No, perfect. First of all, I would say that the anxiety is an all-time high.
Absolutely.
And rightfully so, because there's a lot of concern, a lot of fear, people not knowing what to expect. Of course, they're saying that they are seeking those with a higher priority than others, which would be previous deportation orders that have returned to the country illegally, and so that may be true. I think on a local level, I've seen that with our local ICE offices that they do. The priority is to arrest those that have previous deportation orders and that have come back, and for whatever reason they've been put back on the radar that they've returned illegally. And I think that's fair to say. We don't drive down the street and see ICE officers arresting people on a daily basis. I don't think that happens like maybe someone would like us to believe, but there's going to be fallout, and that's the concern, right? There's going to be a number of individuals that are arrested along with the priority individuals, and that's going to be a major problem.
Yes.
I mean, as we've talked about with the detention centers being the way they are and the conditions that they're now existing down there, what's going to happen when they arrest thousands and thousands of people? That's
a good point. I mean, if we're already if we're overcrowded right now, and the facilities can't handle coming across from through Mexico and to us, then what are we going to do after this roundup on Sunday? Where are those people going to be? What are we going to do with those people?
I have no idea, and it's going to be a horrible situation, because these people that are arrested this weekend still have rights.
Yes.
And they still have the ability to then claim for relief. They might not have access to any sort of relief, but at least they have the right to seek whether they're entitled to it or not. And have a judge say, no, you're not entitled to that, or no, you can't do that, or, oh yeah, you might have relief under that particular code section.
What you just said prior to our break, you indicated that it depends where the judge is located, the judge's interpretation. So you're playing the court game on top of everything else.
Well, that's right. I mean, so one of these cities we're talking, when one of the cities will be San Francisco, and will be Los Angeles, Baltimore, Chicago, Miami, New Orleans, Atlanta, Denver, Houston.
Wow.
So what are those particular judges in those jurisdictions? How are they going to handle them? Are they going to be more liberal and allow these individuals to then seek relief? Or are they going to deny and say nope? But they're entitled to the opportunity to at least see whether they have some relief available to them. Now, If they've been previously deported and they have that priority level, well, as an immigration attorney, it's easy. The answer is no, because there's a number of factors that would lead you to that conclusion. But it's still, I mean, they still have the right to seek whether that's a possibility or not.
Wow.
So that's going to be the concern, is the over.
That's a good point.
Population.
I didn't think about that. We just got through in the first segment talking about the deplorable conditions of these facilities, and then we're going to have a roundup. That's what they call it. The administration put out, we have a roundup on Sunday. What are we going to do with all those people that we arrest? What do we do with them?
That's I mean, presumably they're going to be housed in their local jails, right? Wherever they are found and arrested. I'm presuming that they will be housed in the local jails. Okay. Pending, right, immigration officers coming and getting them and transferring them. I mean, I would imagine they're going to be doing so in conjunction with their local, state, and county officers.
You're assuming that everything's been coordinated with the local police agencies, with the federal.
Well, we're
agencies.
assuming. I mean, because we do have some of these mayors of these particular cities saying, no, we're not going to help. And we're not going to participate. So then where do you house them? And so another example that I have from current situations here locally is we have clients that are being held to, because typically what happens is if these individuals come across the border illegally and they're not detained at the border, then they come in and they live in the United States and they're here illegally, right?
Okay.
And they're living in our communities, which is, a lot of them are great people, but they're here. And let's say they get arrested for a DUI, or they get arrested for speeding or shoplifting or domestic violence or some form of theft, okay? Then that's a state or city crime that they've allegedly committed, of which has to be dealt with by that local municipality, either the state, if it's filed by the state, or the city, if it's filed by the city.
Okay.
So if they're undocumented individuals, then what's happening is ICE is either contacting that local municipality, or that local municipality is contacting ICE saying, we have an individual who's been arrested. He or she is undocumented. They run the search. They do the processing. And they say, okay, undocumented individual, we're going to place an ICE hold on that individual. Okay.
So that's the local authority saying we're going to put an ICE hold?
Well, that's the federal authority saying we're going to put an ICE hold.
Got it. Okay.
And so once they have been released from local, city, or county or state custody, they get transferred to federal custody.
Okay.
Under that ICE hold. And historically what's happened, well, I can say this, prior to Trump, okay, if we had an individual or a client that was arrested locally with an ICE hold, we were oftentimes able to obtain immigration bond here from our local jail.
Oh.
Okay. Since President Trump's inauguration, we have no longer been able to do that. Now they are automatically forced to go to immigration court, and we have to argue the merits of why an immigration bond should be issued.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong. So if in your case, Salt Lake City or Las Vegas?
Correct.
That's your federal. There's not one in St. George, Utah.
No.
It's either Salt Lake City or Las Vegas, and what you're have indicated that it's a strict interpretation of the law, and to get on the docket, it's very, very difficult.
It's difficult. So prior to Trump, we were able to oftentimes obtain an immigration bond and release these individuals from our local jail. Now everyone is now being sent to either Salt Lake or Las Vegas.
Wow.
And so what's happening is in regards to overcrowding of the detention centers, and what's currently happening now is I have multiple clients that are in jail due to an arrest of some level.
So it's going to be local or state municipality.
Correct.
Okay.
So he or she is now in jail.
Okay.
But that the state or local municipality case has been resolved, they've been released from their custody and are now in federal custody. Even so far as maybe a couple months ago, getting them into federal custody and transported to Las Vegas has been a pretty quick process.
Okay.
In a matter of days. Now we're talking a matter of weeks.
Well, because of the system's overloaded.
The system overload.
Wow.
So now we have people remaining in their local jails just waiting to be picked up by immigration officials. But when we call to say, what's the process, what's the status, what's going on, we get no answer as to what the issue is. So we can only presume that it's because system overload. Detention centers in Vegas and Salt Lake are just overcrowded. There's nowhere to put them. So I'm worried, as we talk about this weekend, I'm worried that these individuals are going to be arrested and they're going to be overloading their local jails. Because where are they going to put them? Are they going to bring them down immediately to the detention centers that are overloaded?
Oh, my gosh.
Are they going to put them in the local jails that are presumably overloaded? So
and we're talking huge numbers.
Huge numbers.
37 million people in the 10 major metropolitan areas that have been identified for this weekend. This is going to be wild. I mean, my resources have indicated. I said, what's the real process? Meaning, you've identified someone that needs to be picked up, arrested, and they told me, and I don't think I'm stepping on anybody's toes if I say this on the air, but they said it's in the middle of the night. We go in the middle of the night. We go at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Nope, there's minimum people in the community out. Everybody's sleeping, and we talked about that word anxiety before. Think about this. Think about what's going on, especially if you live or reside in one of those 10 communities and you're illegal.
No, it's frightening to think about, because when you think about not just the immediate individual, but think about that individual's family members.
Yes.
And then think about that individual's friends and extended family members and the people that they've touched in that community and have connections within that community. And they might be working.
Yes.
Whether illegally or not, it's still going to affect that place of employment. I mean, so the ramifications are so, and that's the frustrating part, is it doesn't seem like the consequences that seem to be inevitable have been really thought through. And so I just hope that it won't be as bad as what we've seen, but I can't imagine how it can be anything but as bad, but even worse than what we've seen.
Okay, let me give you another scenario. Just I hear your professionalism on this one. You have a family that's been identified, but they have a dreamer. They have a young son or daughter that's been here for 12 years or 15 or 16 years, and they're getting ready to graduate from high school or whatever it may be. They were born here. What happens to them?
So that's a great question. Of the approximately 800,000 DREAM Act recipients, I'm hoping that all of them have renewed in the last 2 years, or during their renewable time period. As we've talked about,
right,
a
I
few
think
times.
That was January this year, wasn't it?
Right. We know that the government's no longer accepting new applications based on the number of injunctions that were issued by federal courts across the country. I think 4 or 5. This is injunctions in response to Attorney General Sessions and President Trump terminating the DACA program. So that program's still in place. Like I said, not accepting new applications, but those that received it are able to renew. The Supreme Court, from what I understand, has just issued the date in which they're going to hear those court hearings, and that's to take place November 12th.
November 12th
of this year.
Okay, so November, that's a big
day. In fact, I might have misspoken. I want to say I read, Yes, November 12th.
November the 12th.
November 12th.
2019 is
2019
a big date.
Is a big day for DACA. Isn't that something? I mean,
this is going to be so. I mean, can you imagine the ramifications one way or the other?
well, November, if I'm, we're really ramping up for our elections. So that's going to have some significant ramifications in regards to the presidential campaigns.
I would think so.
So
you're right; they are ramped up because we get through August and we're ready to roll, and it's 1 year from the decision by the Supreme Court. 1 year approximately till people go to the polls.
Absolutely.
Wow,
so it's a big deal, and that's a big deal. I know that the Democratic Party is pushing their agenda for the DACA program, obviously for the pathway to citizenship. Depending on who you talk to or listen to, and from the Republican Party, there's various programs and ideas of wanting the same thing. But therein lies the struggle of our U.S. politics. Why haven't we been able to get together and get the two sides of the aisle together to get some legislation in place and put this to bed?
You're absolutely right, because both sides have indicated there's points that need to be resolved. You're absolutely right.
And they know it. And it's just, but we keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again. In fact, in all reality, the last president that actually did anything that had a concrete change and actually helped immigration reform was President Bush.
Wow. President Bush 1 or 2?
2.
George W. That's amazing.
So and that was, I think, I want to say 99, that he pushed some stuff through, and so it helped a lot of people, and before that was Reagan.
That before and all that.
So that's what is a bit ironic, is that the Democrats would like you to believe that they're all about immigration reform, and they may be. I'm not saying they're not, because we talk about it a lot and they talk about it a lot. But really, the few changes over the last 3 or 4 decades that have actually helped immigrants come to this country have come from
George W. Bush and
Ronald
Reagan. Amazing. That's a great point.
So say what you want to say. I don't know what that means in today's current climate and temperature and political climate, but we have to do something. And I'm really, for anyone listening to this radio show, contact a lawyer. I have an app. You can contact me directly. The One Law app. You can download the One Law app.
Is it the number 1 law, right?
Number 1 LAW on your Android or iPhone device. Download the app. And that way, at least you have communication with our office in the event something happens this weekend. Because we know the 10 cities, but I can't imagine that smaller cities and communities aren't following suit.
Some of my sources have said that it's not going to be anywhere near the grand scale of the 10 identified major metropolitan areas, but there will be some activity in medium-sized and smaller communities. So.
I would imagine. I mean, it makes sense. That's not from any sort of direct source, but I'm speculating. But I can't imagine that wouldn't happen. So, and the fear and anxiety is legitimate. It's meritorious. I mean, I would feel the same if I were in those shoes.
Yeah. Do you know, on Thursday, yesterday, the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit in an attempt to protect asylum seekers. Are you aware of that?
I'm not.
Yeah, that just came out, so I don't know where it went. They filed, but I don't know. You said they're saying that meanwhile, the activists have distributed Know Your Rights pocket guides. They're circulating that information in these 10 cities, and hotlines, and planning public demonstrations over this weekend. So I would assume on Saturday and Sunday.
Well, and I, without knowing about the lawsuit and what they've done and the grounds for which they believe they're filing this particular lawsuit, I can say this on my own personal experience. It needs a change. Our asylum laws need revisions. We need case law. We need new precedent, because where there appears to be legitimate asylum seekers from legitimate fear of whether it be gang violence or lack of government control or the inability to go and seek redress from your local police authority there in the countries that you live in, at the moment, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Now, if every good story and every individual that came over seeking asylum and said, "Hey, I'm scared of my local municipality, I'm scared, and the government can't control the gangs, and the government seems to be paid off by the gangs, and the police seem to pay," well, we'd be letting everybody in, I would imagine. And is that the right answer? I don't know. Of course, we are a country built on immigration, so
We are.
That's a hard argument. I get there's two sides to that story, and actually more than two.
Right.
But
If you look at the European side,
right,
that opened their like Sweden and Germany and France, and some of the negative results of open door policy, they shut their doors down as a result of that.
sure,
So that's
100%.
the other side.
Absolutely. I mean, and so there's various sides. I get it, and I'm not naive to that. And so I'm not saying that one side or whatever side you're on is better than the other.
Yeah.
Okay. But what I am saying is, we as a country, I guess, through our elected officials, we have to come together and figure out the best solution, because the current one's not working.
Yeah. And you brought up about George W. Bush. That's why I just read an article whereby we're allowing about 1 million legal immigrants coming in every year since the year 2000. And so that's pretty interesting, that.
Well, and it is. And I would actually think there would be more. But
That's the number they gave me.
Right.
So they probably a little bit more in 1 year, less than another year, but it's 1 million's the magic number.
Wow.
Legal immigrants per year.
Well, and it's interesting, because when you do talk to immigrants that have come over to the country legally, right, they have an interesting perspective, right?
Sure.
A lot of them will say, "Hey, I came over illegally, so they should have also then be required to come over legally." And at times, okay, not all everyone, but at times they're less sympathetic.
Yeah. My mother was a naturalized citizen.
Okay.
So she went through the whole process.
Right.
And she was proud.
Absolutely.
And I know that we didn't have the crisis. Unfortunately, she's not with us any longer.
That
But
we do now.
I know her statement would be, I went through that, let them go through it, and they'll appreciate the country that this country more.
Sure.
And that would be her attitude.
And that attitude's not without merit.
Yeah.
I mean, sure. I mean, I get it. But it's also broken, because, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on the show, but I have a cousin born and raised in England with a U.S. born or a U.S. citizen father. And she's seeking naturalization, and she filed her petition 7 years ago, and
Wow.
she's still waiting for the ability to come over with
My mother
with
was
a visa.
6 years from the time.
And so
that was after World War II.
So my cousin's saying, "Well, I have a U.S. citizen father. Why?" And so even the legal naturalization process, even that system is broken, because arguably you could say, wait, you're a daughter of a U.S. citizen? Well, of course you should have legal entry to the United States. But even that process.
And that's one of your family members.
It was a family member.
And I'm sure they're saying, why aren't you waving your magic wand, right?
And I say, I wish I had one.
Listen, I hate to say this. I told you time would go flying by. It has.
You were right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Tyler Todd for being with us once again and discussing immigration. And I'm sure that I marked this on your calendar, because November the 12th, or November 13th, that week afterwards, like what just happened, I'd love to have you back for that. Probably if there's something else in between, get ready for my call, and I'll plead my case again to get you back here
Absolutely.
in the studio. I just really enjoy it, and it really does help out our listeners. I just have a statement here. I just, for the fun of it, I said, what is the U.S. immigration principles? And here's our principle. This is a quote. the reunification of families, admitting immigrants with skills that are valuable to the United States economy, protecting refugees, and promoting diversity. That's the principles of our U.S. immigration policy.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go to meet those.
I know that, but I just thought I'd throw that at the end of this show. Tyler, Todd, thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tips for this week. Next week, we got another exciting topic and issue, and some of our guests are going to be coming in, so I'm not going to let it out. I never do tell you. Okay, but you can take a look at us on Facebook, Twitter. You can look at our podcast, Podbean, as well as we're on the air at 3 o'clock every Friday afternoon, and we rebroadcast at 5 o'clock on Saturdays. Until next week, this is Bob Oxley, and thanking once again Tyler Todd for being here. And our topic today and issues that we discussed was U.S. immigration policy. Have a great week, everyone.